Hello all, I am very excited to welcome you to the very first episode of Causon and the Customer, where I will be inviting a different guest on with me each episode to chat about all things service, business and leadership. From FTSE 350 business leaders to journalists to customer service influencers, we want to give you a holistic view of the service agenda, what makes good service and what businesses can do today to elevate their customer service offering and ultimately their bottom line. And what an exciting first episode we have. Against the backdrop of National Customer Service Week, and in particular today's theme of effective service leadership, I will be in conversation with Chris Pitt, CEO of First Direct, about how and why of putting service first to continue differentiating in the UK's first challenger bank. I hope you all enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Well, guys, it's absolutely fantastic to be with you today for what I think will be a really inspirational and exciting podcast. Because today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by the brilliant Chris Pitt. Many of you will already know Chris is CEO of First Direct and has been there nearly 4 years, I think, in the autumn. And prior to that has had very senior roles across HSBC and in many different roles in terms of the marketing of HSBC. And then previous to that, actually Tesco. So it's pretty unusual, I think, to actually have a CEO that's come from a marketing background, and we're going to talk a bit about that. But firstly, a really warm welcome to you, Chris. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks very much, Joe. You're far too kind as ever.
No, never. But let's just talk about that a little bit. Let's get into this. It is quite unusual. You know, we've talked about it a lot, Chris, haven't we, over the years, to have people that have had a background either in customer service or in marketing, and I always think the two are hugely linked, to be able to become CEOs of organisations. A good thing, I might say. Tell us a bit about your journey and why you think that is so important, because that has brought a particular style and brand to how you run the bank, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, I think first thing I'd say though is First Direct has been a fantastic customer service business that we've been engaging with you guys for many, many years, for the whole of its history. I think about this as I'm really keeping the chair warm and I've got to maintain what is an amazing legacy of brilliant customer service delivery. And if I didn't do that, I need to look myself in the mirror relative to that. And the team and the people of FD have continued to do that over the 4 years that I've been there, but it was being done before that. I think the superpower of a marketeer is empathy. The ability to crawl inside the head of the person who you want to talk to, engage to around whatever you've got to talk to them about, engage them about, as well as commercial organisations, non-for-profits or charities, whatever it may be, is to really understand what matters to the people that you're trying to talk to. And the way that I think I've worked reasonably well within First Direct is FD has always been about empathy. When it was first formed, famously at a minute past midnight, 1st of October 1989, when everybody banked in a branch, it needed to have super brilliant customer service to actually attract customers away from the traditional trusted means of delivery of banking products. And that means it needed to really understand who it was going after and what mattered to them to be able to deliver customer service that would encourage them to do something which is unusual in banking, really, which is to move away from established relationships. So that empathy is a real connect between marketing and FD in particular. I think more of it would be better at the very top of organisations because you're really understanding people from the ground up. And then understanding what matters to people. When I started in a marketing department, it was about customer need. And lots of customers need things, but it often doesn't matter to them. An example I give is I really need pension advice because I've broadly ignored it for the whole of my career because it's far too complicated. Because it doesn't matter to me. So really understanding that sweet spot of what matters to people and thinking about how you then wrap yourself around them to deliver services and products that matter to them at the appropriate time.
And that means being very genuine, being authentic, really caring and putting yourself out there. And I think that's really interesting, Chris, because I know you've got a slightly unusual set of values. And one of those values is really giving a damn, really caring, isn't it? So how do you make sure that those values are seen and felt and lived, I guess, both inside the organisation and outside the organisation? Because I get a real sense of your leadership style is to really lead with that and to really drive those values through.
The first thing I say, though, is your values of your organisation need to be true to it. You can't put them out there and hope it drags your organisation into a different place. We've often talked about, all businesses talk about making money and customer service. Lots of successful businesses make money, but do they really deliver on the customer service at a fundamental level?
Yeah.
So you've got to truly believe it. And FD and the people of FD have delivered brilliant customer service for many, many years. But the values we have, which are stand together, bring a smile, make things better, and give a monkeys, we'll call it that on this podcast, save all our blushes, are true of the organisation. They came out of the organisation. They weren't imposed upon it. The second thing I'd do, reflecting upon the values of FD, would be to say FD is a very real business. It's a very human sort of business. The culture of customer service pervades it to the extent that I sit in the call centre, all my management team sit in the call centre, we're very present. People know us by our first names. People come up and tell us if something isn't working. Generally, I get more of what things need to get better than things that are working, but that's a sign of, to me, of a very good organisation. But it's very real. You couldn't be kind of lackey in morality, I think, or being vacuous, being part of FD, because you get found out. It's part of how the organisation is. So the values come out of it. Then how they present. Is that kind of stand together is about community, bring a smile. Is banking's pretty dull, pretty complicated, it's pretty important. So if you can do it with a sense of humanity and grace, that's really central to our DNA. Making things better. Bankers, because we tend to be completer finishers, try to do everything to a degree of perfection. Sometimes we need to improve things, and that improvement delivers to 90% of what matters to customers. And then give a monkeys. We give a monkeys about each other within the community of FD, and we give a monkey about our customers. Things like going the extra mile. So examples especially come through our telephony service of someone getting stranded without enough money at Leeds Station. The rep got in their car and drove to Leeds Station and gave them some money. Once, when we were having some issues with one of our processes, one of the reps paid for the customer's shopping and then claimed it back. And they knew that they had the confidence, the backing of the management to do that.
We know that the culture is driven, as you said, from the leadership, but actually it's the people inside the organisation that live that culture and have a real life experience. And all those little nuggets, all those stories, I guess, make the brand of, FD and really kind of drive that forward. So you've been, top of the tree, let's be honest with you, in terms of your customer service and your focus on customer service. We're very proud that you are members of the Institute, and we know that you really champion the whole service agenda. But, there's always challenges that will enter in and go after your crown and keep driving that. So how, will you look to differentiate as you go forward, Chris? What do you think, if you kept the customers, you were saying, at the real heart and really understand those priorities, where do you see that going as a bank differentiating yourselves?
In the spirit of being friendly, I might slightly disagree with you.
Okay, that's fine, no problem at all.
Because people in financial services, 90% of financial services, it just works. We're like the Drullens. If we don't work, we know we're around. I think the additional things within there are loyalty, rewarding loyalty, and emotional trust. All banks have rational trust. You never expect any bank to not pay a direct debit. But do they all have emotional trust? Do the customers think that the bank is on their side, that will do the right thing? And FD, relative to the kind of the metrics that we see, does have that emotional trust, and you see that with the connection with our customers.
So just on that, Chris, I think it's a really important bit. So this is not about gimmicks, is what I'm hearing, if I was summarising that. It's not about doing more things. It's about really establishing a very deep relationship, a trusted relationship with your customer base. So that really doesn't change, to your point, although it needs to be nourished and grown. So we are living as consumers, because as consumers, we are living in really challenging times, aren't we? The whole idea is trying to make customer service frictionless. We know because of the challenges over fraud, cyber security, etc., and to add more friction back in. Then we have, we'll never get through a conversation without talking about AI and, how it's going to change and revolutionise, I guess, our worlds. So from your perspective, how will you see perhaps that side changing, growing or developing? Are you going to be seeing a lot more use of AI to, help perhaps the agent or make sure that the app is working effectively in a way that actually is responding more to a more personalized service for the customer? Where do you see that going?
Well, and you could argue this is a function of my incompetence, Joe, but I always see technology in service of an outcome, and the outcomes don't change. When you engage with a bank, you broadly want it to be over quite quick because you want to be able to do something else. Banking is quite broad, so you've got more complex products like mortgages and longer term savings where you actually might want to get better educated and better understanding. How do you deliver that service to those people? How do you deliver your proposition to those people? And I think sometimes what we do is we get lost in the supply side nature of our business in terms of a new technology comes along and we get lost in that rather than thinking about the fundamentals are the same, but how does this help us to do this? Speed is important, but it's not important when you're dealing with a mortgage. You don't want to be rushed in and rushed out. So I think AI will have a real benefit to customers relative to for the simple transactions, simple things they want to do, turbocharge that side of our business. 40 times more people use our app every week than call us up.
Yeah.
So it will turbocharge that. There's more things that we'll be able to do and more things that all banks will be able to do in servicing customers who less and less want to talk about things that they find simple. In terms of then how it works on the supply side, I think if you do happen to call us up, the ability of a customer rep in FD being able to get to answer your question more simply. All banks have lots of systems that they engage to. And, I'm sure you've run up a bank at times and you can hear the person working numerous systems to be able to cut through that and do that much more quickly. I think what we need to do, because at the heart of banking is safety, security and trust, is you need to make sure that it absolutely works before you try it out on your customer. Again, and I say it might be a function of my own incompetence. Understanding what matters to people and knowing that banking is dull, complicated and important are the fundamental building blocks on which you then point technologies at to solve customer problems and reinforce what matters to customers.
Yeah, and it's really clear. Hearing you speak reminds me of an earlier podcast with Peter Cross, and he was talking about, in some ways, the customer experience in the retail world, what matters is no different to what mattered in the 1950s. Your local shop, having that personal contact, knowing and really understanding Fred and what's making Fred, keep awake at night. And I'm really struck by that. So you definitely are talking about, obviously, technology being an enabler. But do I get a sense from you, Chris, that as far as you're concerned, the human in the loop, the human contact will always remain critical to First Direct?
Yeah, we are absolutely committed to 24/7, 365 UK-based call centres with no IVR. You ring FD up and you'll speak to somebody. That's part of the mix of how we distribute and how we engage with our customers. So we've got chatbots, people who work chat, we've got people who use the desktop, and we've got lots of people who use the app. But it's part of our mix. A small number of our customers generate a really significant number of our calls. But we're continuing to service them in that way because that's how they want to be serviced. But more and more what you see is the digitized AI into the future will deal with these simple transactions and the more complicated things. And the important thing to recognize in that is what is complicated to me might not be complicated to you.
Yeah.
So there's an irony that younger people are more likely to go to a branch to open an account with a Causon.
Yeah.
Or they're more likely to go to a branch to open a mortgage rather than if you're remortgaging, you've done it 2 or 3 times before. Probably you could be older and therefore less likely to be kind of cutting edge, but you might use more because you're actually much more confident in the process. So it's that nuance. And again, that's why the words "what matters" are so, for me, so powerful, because what matters to me and what matters to you, even though we might look exactly the same relative to the socio-demographic, it can be completely different relative to our confidence or our attitude to risk.
Do you know what, Chris? I think this is really important because we are living in a world, aren't we, where we like to group things, we like to make things easy. And as marketeers, and I'm also an ex-marketeer, segmentation is always king, wasn't it? You always had to try and compartmentalize people. And I think what I'm hearing from you is the nuances, the we might have some similarities, but really understanding those nuances and what makes me tick, what makes you tick, is really critical to that customer experience. And the tech, as we were saying, can help with some of that. But ultimately, if I'm in a fix, I don't want to talk to a piece of tech. I want to talk to a human being that empathizes, connects, and really understands. And I think this is really true, because I think we're at a really important time for customer service. And that link between a blended approach between using the tech to speed things up, make things much more efficient, but also training and developing our people to be the very best that they can be and to be themselves. And I know your whole recruitment policy, your whole training policy, I had the privilege of coming up and spending some time in Leeds. And it was really interesting watching how the team genuinely work together to support one another, but also hold each other to account. So you have a lovely culture, but it's a very accountable and owner-led culture too, which I think is another key part of that. So there's the yin and the yang, really understanding what motivates the customer, what's important to me, what's important to you. And also I get that sense you're living that through the organisation too, and your people. And I think that is increasingly important when we're trying to attract the right people into our organisations too. So can I just ask you a couple of things, probably a bit on the more practical side as well, Chris, about some practical tips. So this podcast will go out to a whole series of different individuals. We are living in a pretty crazy world at the moment. It's pretty challenging on a whole host of different fronts. So as a business leader, what's your practical tips in terms of trying to embed a customer experience or a culture of customer service, particularly, perhaps dare I say it, when a board doesn't really buy the service agenda as much as you and I would in terms of why that makes that difference? So what's the ROI? Why is service so important, Chris?
I'm no oracle, but the way that I've got about it is you wrap it around what is commercially important to your organisation. I think it's very, very similar to the diversity and inclusion agenda. If it's considered to be something else, most people are very busy. So you add something else on, it becomes something that is unlikely to get around to. Yeah. Rather than customer experience and D&I actually, if you make it a means to an end to solve what matters to the people who are working within your organisation. So if I'm tasked to deliver a trading number or to deliver the balance sheet requirements or to manage the risks, the fact that customer experience and customer service is interwoven with that rather than something else. And it's at the heart of FD. I spoke to the original CEO, the original trading CEO of FD when I started. I'm a historian by degree, so I wanted to go back. And I wanted to build my legacy to be built on the history of what FD was all about. I spoke to this guy called Kevin Newman, who he spoke to me from his home in Santa Barbara, California, as I spoke to him from a dim office in Leeds. Exactly. We can all hope.
Yes, absolutely.
And he talked about, FD was originally set up to talk to emerging affluent customers in the late 1980s, early 1990s. But it was also to drive its trading volumes, it needed to have super brilliant customer service at its heart because, as I said before, it was taking people away from branches, everybody back to the branch. So we were the first telephone bank, we were the first web-based bank, one of the very first app banks. Understanding that was at the heart of the commerciality meant that that's why we've always continued to do it. It's not a kind of a whimsical, nice to do. It's at the heart of the organisation. And I think that's the really important thing. Now, it will be different for different industries and different circumstances. Unless you can tell the story of customer service within the organisation rather than as something as an additional. Yeah. We're not doing this for goodness of our hearts. Some of us would do, but actually we're doing it because actually it's delivering fantastic commercial outcomes.
I seem to remember too, Chris, when we talked, I think last year was one of your strongest years in terms of attracting new customers too. So the whole kind of sense of the return for the business is very, very clear. And, you will know, Chris, a long time at the Institute now, we've been campaigning and really pushing the return on investment of customer service. And your second point to that about it doesn't just happen overnight. It's embedded. It continues. It's not a bolt-on. It's not an add-on. It's actually just the way we do business around here. And that goes to the heart of a service culture. And I sometimes, if I was honest, I think some organisations, certainly some organisations are struggling with that. And I think some banks are still struggling with that. And for me, the reason why the service agenda, if you take it back to that time before, you were set up a competitive environment when you have branches. We're now entering a very competitive environment. Most people can get an app. Most people can bank in all sorts of different ways that they want to. So the one thing that makes you absolutely unique is how do you turn up for your customer and how do you actually really drive that through. And I think that is very, very clear. And you can see that follow through in terms of all of the history and the handovers of how you've approached that, which I think is really, really fascinating and really important. So I'm conscious of time, but there's a few more questions I definitely want to try and squeeze out of you if I possibly can. So in an interview in our own magazine, which you kindly did for us, you said that First Direct and First Direct people have always done is wrap themselves around the customer rather than the mechanics of banking. So how do you, in this external world that we've said, how do you encourage or just keep that thinking so it's not become transactional? It does still maintain that, because the world has moved on since the late 90s. So how do you keep that longevity of that purpose? How do you keep on? Is that through training? Is that through the development? Is it through your recruitment? What do you think that little bit of magic dust that has made sure that everybody in the organisation is as customer centric as they are?
Well, the irony of business like ours is most of the transactions are digital, vast majority, but most of the people in the organisation pick up the phone. So you've got to temper your understanding relative to, if the computers could talk, they'd tell you an awful lot of things. So you need to get the information and the insight out of your journeys that are more digitized, as well as the ones that come out to telephony. Now, clearly there's a connection there, because sometimes people might fall out of a digital journey into the telephony, and therefore they will tell you. And I use that as evidence of an organisation like ours needs to renew. We are, and again, it's not for me to say as a CEO, but I'd like to think of an organisation that holds our feet to the fire relative to the things that are going wrong. We just had a cultural audit within First Direct, and the first thing my management team asked was, what are the things we're not doing right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm reminded of a story I was told about the man who set up IKEA. Sorry, I don't know his name. Well, when they made their first a huge amount of profit, he had a minute's silence to mourn in the boardroom so that they were focused down on what they were going to do next. So,
gosh, that sounds quite tough.
Yes, no, I think again, I don't know an awful lot about it. I think he had that kind of culture. But that's what you got to do is don't get lost in your own sense of your own brilliance. You got to continue to say, how can I get better?
Yeah.
That to me is how a culture renews. Clearly, the challenge with that is you don't want to wear sackcloth and ashes all the time, and you want the people to be cheerful, engaged, and want to bring their best selves to work. We do it through the training. We famously employ people who are extroverts. People who want to talk to people rather than people who actually understand financial services from the ground up. And that, again, that's something that we continue to reinforce within our culture. The values that we've got, which is about being as one, making things better and going the extra mile, and doing it with a sense of our own irrelevance to an extent, be kind of like doing it with a smile, because again, you can get too serious about this stuff.
And banking can be very serious, to your point. So I think you've brought also a heightened sense of, I don't want to use the word, maybe fun's not the right word, but I get that sense of you wear what you do lightly. It's not so heavy in terms of that conversation, but you take it seriously.
Yeah, you've got to be credible. I mean, I come back to something you said, we were talking before about customer experiences. You want the people within the organisation to think in an enterprise way, not to think about their customer experience team or the marketing team or the finance team. You want them to think. I think I've said this a few times recently. I'm one who doesn't like this. We need to get this signed off by X, or what does X think? I couldn't care less what X thinks. Well, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, is this the right thing to do with this organisation's resources in service of our customers?
Yeah.
And if it is, when we take it to be signed off or wherever it needs to go within the organisation, you might have difference of opinion as to whether it's the most important thing to do or that you do it a different way, but have enterprise thinking. Don't think I'm the customer experience person and I've got to sell this. Well, I've talked about this before. I remember I went to an event, the Menopause Awards. We're very proud of the fact that we support people who are going through the menopause and people support people who are going through the menopause. as well as actually we just won an award recently for supporting people going through who are victims of domestic abuse. But I was at this menopause event, and this guy from another part of the bank said to me, your customer X service is great. He goes, can I come and visit your customer experience team? And I got a lady who runs the mortgages team over, and I said, say it again. He said, can I come and see if we both just laughed? Because it's everybody's responsibility to deliver it. It's not the responsibility of the team. Now, I'm not making any comment upon any other organisation's structures, but if you've got it embedded in your DNA, you don't need a small group of people in the corner telling you.
I remember as well, to your point, Chris, you said to me, I remember asking you something like, who are the most important people in your organisation? Obviously yourself. But apart from that, I remember you saying very clearly, my customer experience director and my CFO. And that triumphant in terms of really driving that through and inculcating that across the whole of the organisation. You definitely get that sense when you walk through your doors, and you can also see the energy and the excitement of people want to be there and they want to deliver that. I guess one of my questions to that is, I have a brilliant job and I get to talk to lots of CEOs and lots of different industry sectors. And one of the things that has been keeping many organisations awake at night is recruitment and retention. And as we said, we've gone through COVID, cost of living, all of those kind of issues. Have you experienced any issues with that? Because I know you've actually got quite a long tenure of staff, haven't you, colleagues? But have you experienced that? And how's that shaping for you in terms of the next period? Because personally, there's a hidden agenda here. Chris, I think we're very bad in the UK at workforce planning and really thinking about what we're going to need in future time. So I'm just interested in your take on that.
No, it's a challenge for us. As you pointed out, the average tenure of someone in a call centre, which is the vast majority of our people, is about 18 months, 2 years. The average tenure in FD is 11 years. Yeah. Hamilton, where we've got a site just to the east of Glasgow, we opened that site 27 years ago. We do a thing called Direction every year, where we go around and talk to every single member of FD and talk about what we've done and what we're going to do into the future. We were adding up the number of years on the table, and we were getting to like 150 years on tables of the people there. In terms of recruiting new people, we operate out of 2 sites, and some of the environments are very hot, especially for financial services in Leeds. So we're not seeing the level of engagement that we've historically seen. Yeah. And there's an element of we've been there for 39 years as well. So it really is a challenge for us. Because equally, you don't want to not take people on who don't want to do that role, because that comes out through the telephony and it comes out through the other things that the business does. So it is a very much a challenge, to be honest. I haven't got a magic wand answer.
Well, as I said, you're not alone, Chris, because many of my conversations with people have been about skills and also a shortage of those skills. And I think, where we're facing at the moment, that is eased a little bit, but still very much an issue that I think will keep many of us on our toes as we go forward. So you also said to The Guardian, I believe, that the best advice is to be kind. And we all have a pretty good idea of what that means in a personal sense. But on a serious note, Chris, we are in a challenging economic period. At the end of the day, we all have to make sure that we trade well and we get those results. So how can be kind apply to business in your view? How can we be kind in business? Because I happen to agree with you, but what's the lesson maybe outside of First Direct? Because for many years, hasn't there, there's been a kind of a sense that if we're too kind, then we're seen as soft. And they're two different things in my mind. From your point of view, how can we make sure that we are kind in a business sense?
Yeah, my youngest son taught me this, because I'm world class at very few things, but as a working class Cockney, I'm quite good at being cynical.
Okay.
And he pointed out to me that I was being far too cynical sometimes. Thinking about what matters to the other person and come back to that bring a smile is, how do you leave that person with a positive, any interaction you have, how do you leave that person with a more positive feeling than when you engage with them? That is not out of kilter with driving a successful organisation, I don't think. It's not a barrel of laughs in a risk committee, to be honest. You're not, again, cracking the flag with jokes when you're talking about managing your P&L. It doesn't need to be a very unhappy sort of conversation. But then there are times where you can, I think about it relative to the phraseology you use in communication, kind of talks in a human way. and you engage in a warm way to people, it's not just about getting it over the line. That then filters down into the organisation. I saw someone's out of office the other day, and it was, thank you for your email, I am spending like 3 weeks in the Bahamas. And you're thinking, well, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Because it makes me think I'm not in the Bahamas. Yeah. And also, I probably can't afford to go to the Bahamas.
And actually, who cares where you are? Back to that point. It's much more about me. I need to get hold of you. So the bit of the information about that is, when will you be back? That's the most important.
And those little hooks create that cultural dynamic. Yeah. But it does come back to what I said before, which is it's no well and good being kind and sending nice emails if your commercials are not in the right place, if your risks aren't being managed well, if your core of your business is not being managed well, your process, your procedures. Can people get food when they come into the office? Can they book a holiday when they want to? There's quite a lot of fundamentals that then you layer up on top, things that are kind of thoughtful and engaging and what matters to people, and deliver them in a way which is warm and empathetic.
Yes.
But to be honest, it very much is the veneer. It's a bit like banks. Very, very similar. You think about the services we provide, they're very, very similar. But why people choose is a function of the small things and the small signals that they send above the kind of the fundamentals, really.
Which goes back, really, I suppose, to the whole thing around leadership, Chris. And I know that you are a very humble individual. Much of the interview we've had this day has been talking about what else can I learn? Never standing still, always constantly challenging, but in an encouraging way. Really listening, really active listening is what we're talking about. Really understanding what keeps your customers awake, but also what matters to your customers. But the reality is we're here to deliver a business. So what you're really talking about is all of that behaviour, is how you do your business. But you're still doing the business, because that's the reality of running an organisation of any size. And I think that's really important about when we lean in to future and when we start to look at how we, I guess, navigate the challenging environment that we are in. Because I think it is going to be really important. I look at the membership across the Institute. We've got some brilliant members, but I know that customer service is under pressure. We've seen it have some of the biggest falls since the beginning of the UK CSI, and we've seen that in a lot of evidence. And our job is to help people to continue to believe in why customer service is so important to the bottom line of their organisations, but also to the difference it can make to the customer, to your point, or to the employee. So I think there's a really big drive, and Chris, at the Institute, we've been pushing very hard through our service manifesto and through other activities about really making sure that the service agenda is understood and the impact of that service agenda is understood. So with that in mind, I'm sat there in front of, dare we believe it, non-believers. So any board that might not be as up for this as we might want to be. What is your advice to that board, Chris? What should they really, we talked about risk, reputational risk, I think, links to that. But what's your advice to the board if they're really only paying lip service to the service agenda?
Well, I think it comes back to that point about considering the totality of the business and the sustainability of the business. There's very few businesses which exist over a period of years that don't have brilliant customer service at their heart. They just don't exist. We've got examples within the corporate Britain of businesses which generate short-term profit, but they do things to their cost base primarily, or to their offer, which are then not sustained. And I think at the heart of it, and I would imagine most people don't get to a board, they don't think like this, but it's about your legacy. What's your legacy? When I took this job, I was, as you said before, a CMO coming into being a CEO. Could I do it? Was it plausible? Could I be successful? At the heart of that, it was wanted to leave a legacy that was built around the history of First Direct, which was true to First Direct, but delivered to the future of the needs of the customers that we wanted to engage to. Again, it's going to be in the heart and the minds of all the people who are on board, but do you want to be someone who doesn't leave a legacy which is sustainable?
Yeah, and, Chris, we've talked about this before. Purpose, real clarity about the purpose. Are we still relevant to what we're doing, what we want for our customers? And what's the outcome? What's the long-term legacy? And I think that is absolutely critical. And one of my challenges, I guess, is trying to encourage UK PLC to think longer term. Because I think we are in a very short term, and certain sectors are more short term than others. Banking perhaps less so, but retail very short term. And I think this is it's a bit of an issue for the UK. And I think the more that we can encourage a sustainable approach towards business, then that has got to be a better trajectory, I think, for the UK, and will obviously help with the growth that we desperately need in the UK too. So I would agree with that. Chris, you've been very generous with your time. So I'm going to ask you one final question, if I may. It's such a great job being the person that's asking the questions. What is the one change business leaders can implement today that you think will fundamentally change the future of service or customer service?
So I'm going to repeat myself again. I think what the one change is really understand what matters to your punter. I talk to a couple every week where we haven't done what we want to do for them. They've complained. I find it very, very useful to connect up all the kind of the data and the numbers that I see from a customer perspective and turn it into a customer problem we haven't necessarily solved as best as we could. To do that, you need to investigate that conversation or that kind of customer journey and really understand what happened there that is beyond the inputs, the systems, the processes, the procedures, how it kind of culminated. You know, you're never going to be able to ring them all up and ask them what matters to every single one of them. It's getting that sense of what really matters to them, because then you can be confident in what you're delivering is going to deliver commercial success, is going to trade your business well. Otherwise, if you just use the dry data, if you don't kind of get that sense of the humanity of your customers as well, then you'll succeed for a while. You might, but will you really succeed in a way that does leave that legacy and goes the extra mile? And exposing yourself to what matters to your people, your customers, and also your people. In our organisation, the way our organisation is set up, we do exchanges very often, and people on the front line tell me and tell my leadership team what's actually happening.
Yeah.
So continuing to expose yourself to the things that you might not want to hear if you kind of want a quiet life.
Yeah, always agitated, always looking for better, always trying to strive to get a better outcome for your customers and for your people. Chris Pitt, it's an absolute pleasure. As always, thank you so much for spending the time with us, and thank you also for all that you do to champion customer service and also champion the work of the Institute. I really appreciate that.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for asking.
Well, there you have it. It's always fantastic to speak to Chris, and such a strong and brilliant business leader. And I hope that everyone has got something from our first conversation. Join us next time while I'll be chatting to the FT's resident consumer editor and published money expert Claire Barrett, who's going to be discussing the consumer angle on what makes good customer service, as well as the business landscape more broadly. So I look forward to hearing and tuning in with you soon. Thank you.